phone.
Oh, hi. Good morning,
Hello,
James. I just wanted to give a little background information. My mother was German who fled in 1934 to Holland.
Gosh.
Because Holland had been neutral in the First World War,
Yes.
and her parents believed that after the Kristallnacht, that to go to Holland was probably the safest place for her to be, where she met my father in Amsterdam.
Be a little later than 34, I think, wouldn't it? Or not? But anyway, these are details.
Yeah, no, she fled in 1934 to Amsterdam, where she worked as an au pair for a Dutch family.
Okay.
And I think probably during the next 3 or 4 years she met my father, and they married in 1938.
Right.
And then, of course, Germany invaded Holland. In Holland, of the 120,000 Jews that lived there, only 7,000 survived, and my mother and father were two of them, because they fled Amsterdam and lived on a farm in the north of Holland with a farmer's family who dug out a space in
Take all the time you want, Rob.
Yeah,
Take all the time you want. Like a haystack, was it?
I just forgotten the word, but they were hiding in a haystack, sorry.
Yes.
They were hiding for 4 years in a haystack and only could come out at night. But my father's brother and wife and children, they never believed that the Germans were that bad.
Right.
And they ended up in Auschwitz, where they were gassed.
So this is the distinction between within the same family, people who fled fast and fled early, and people who thought it must be exaggerated. It won't happen to us. We went to school with these people. We live next door to them. You're overreacting.
Yes, and of course my father was in the army. So until, of course, Holland capitulated after the Germans bombed Rotterdam, totally flattened it, and then threatened to do the same to Amsterdam. Holland capitulated on the fourth day. And then my father worked for the Dutch underground, and that's how they went to live on a farm in north of Holland.
Yes, I get it.
And of course, the people that were hiding them were just as much at risk to be sent to a concentration camp as the Jews themselves. So
or they'd be left hanging in the town square to pour encourager les autres, to as a deterrent to other people thinking of behaving in a decent humanitarian fashion. How did they get out? Do you know? Well, you must know.
Of course, my mother and father survived until Holland was sort of free in 1945. Right. But in the last few months, because, of course, the British were stopped at Arnhem, so half of Holland was freed, and the other half of Holland wasn't freed. So in the last winter of 1945, they were literally eating grass in the streets and anything they could find in dustbins.
How you know the question I want to ask you, don't you, Rolf? Growing up like that, particularly there with the lessons of your uncle, your father's brother, who thought everything would, it will soon pass. How do you? I mean, I don't want to be crass. I'm almost tempted to say, how do you get out of bed in the morning? But how did your family cling on to the notion that most people are good?
I was born in 1947, so it was after the war.
Yes.
So I never really met any of my grandparents or my father's brother. All I have were photos from photo albums. My mother didn't really want to talk about it a great deal, and neither did my father.
No,
and
of course.
We were so little, we wouldn't know what to ask. All we were told at school what the Germans had done. But of course, when you're that little, you don't ask questions like that. And by the time I was old enough, it was almost too late, because my father
in that
died
case,
when I was 9 years old.
It's an internal dialogue then, isn't it? How do you cling on to the notion that most people are decent when your family history provides so much evidence that, given the right provocations, then almost everybody could be profoundly indecent.
Well, I in a way, it is much history. Although it was my family, it is no different the way I sort of, like other people, it's just history because
Yes.
I was never part of it. It was only what I was told.
Yes.
So in a way, I was an outsider just like everyone else because I never met my family, so you don't know what you've missed because you never met them.
Yes, no, I get that, and I suppose perhaps it's only on days like today that I mean, not for you and your family, but for the rest of us, the sheer scale of it is so hard to comprehend. But if you've grown up in the shadow of it, if it's been omnipresent in your family history, whether it's talked about or not, then possibly it doesn't feel as incomprehensible or as, I don't know quite what the word I'm looking for is. This sense that either you know everything about it or you know nothing about it.
Well, all I know, this is another very interesting thing. When I was old enough to ask all the questions, and my father was dead and my mother was dead,
Yes.
I decided to go and look at German websites.
Oh, yes.
And it's astonishing. The Germans recorded absolutely everything.
Yes.
Every person that entered the camp,
Yeah.
every person that was gassed,
Every shoelace.
with exact dates.
Yes.
So basically, I went through it and then translated it. But I just this morning I just translated a little bit. My mother's name was Reinheimer.
Yes.
I just want to read you a little bit, which is out of the records.
Of course.
No family was hit as hard as that of Ferdinand Reinheimer by the riots against the Jews in Eberstadt in November the 10th. They even give the date. Members of the party, the SA and the Hitler boys from Eberstadt invaded the house and apartment. A neighbor reported that he had heard verbal abuse against the Reinheimer family from their home. When he later entered the apartment, he found the Reinheimers crying in the kitchen, the furniture overturned and destroyed, the other household items broken, partly looted. Later, a passerby heard calls for help from the apartment, went inside and saw a horde of Hitler boys playing the piano, whereby Ferdinand Reinheimer was humiliated by the fact that he had to dance to the music on the table or stove. And he was hit. He had to quote something from the Talmud, which I think is the Jewish
Yes, of course.
to the Bible. And at the end of each verse, he was hit on the head so hard that he hit the wall. So, to the finest details,
Yes.
they've written everything up. So, for me, it's the first time I read all this stuff.
Is it?
And
How does it make you feel?
I just can't work it out. Because let me tell you something else. After the war, my mother was a psychologist.
Yes.
So my mother then started treating the children that survived the concentration camps.
Oh.
And when they got married and had children, there were also problems. So my mother also treated the children of the survivors.
Of course, yes.
So my whole life, in a way, I was exposed to it. But because I've lived in England now for 53 years, for the past 53 years, in a way, I was distant from what was going on in my mother's life.
I do understand what you're saying. I do.
Now, one other thing I want to say, because when I grew up, so I was born in 1947. When I was 6 or 7 years old, children used to play in the streets. We all did. Because,
of course.
and even then, I was bullied by children in the street because I was Jewish. Now, at the time, I didn't think about it. But then I thought, how can Dutch people, having survived the war and having seen what happened to the Jews, that for some reason these parents must have instilled in their children, who were only as old as me,
Yes.
that Jewish people are not like other people.
And so it goes. So it comes round again. And that is the point, isn't it? That is, I guess, the luxury of not having a family connection with the Holocaust, the privilege of not having any family connection with the Holocaust, is that you can spend a significant portion of your life thinking that it was done by a different species, almost an alien. I remember looking at the pictures in school, and at a relatively young age, actually, probably younger than they study such pictures now, and just thinking that it was almost like something that had been done by I'm going to keep saying it. I've got no better words. A different species.